My daughter called me on a Wednesday morning. I was in the middle of changing the oil on my truck, old habit, never trusted anyone else to do it, when my phone buzzed on the workbench. I saw her name on the screen and wiped my hands on the rag before picking up. She didn't say hello. She said, "Dad." Just that one word, and I already knew. There's a tone a grown child uses when something is broken inside them. Not crying exactly. Worse than crying. That flat, hollow sound like they've already used up all the shock and what's left is just the weight of it. I said, "Where are you?" She said she was in the parking lot of a Cracker Barrel off I-40. She'd been driving for 2 hours and had to pull over because she couldn't see straight. I asked if my granddaughter was her. She said yes. Sophie was in the back seat asleep, didn't know anything yet. I said, "Stay there, I'm coming." She started to explain, started to say something about Martin, about his mother, about what had been said, and I stopped her. "Tell me when I get there," I said. "Just stay put." I drove 40 minutes with the oil still half drained on my truck, borrowed my neighbor's Silverado without much explanation, and found them in the parking lot just like she said. My daughter sitting in the driver's seat staring straight ahead, Sophie curled up in the back with her jacket over her shoulders. I knocked on the window. My daughter looked at me and her face just fell apart. Like she'd been holding herself together for 2 hours, and the second she saw me she didn't have to anymore. I got her out of the car, stood in that parking lot, and let her talk. Let me back up. My daughter Elaine married Martin Voss 4 years ago. I want to be fair here because I'm telling you this story and I'm her father, and you should know my bias going in. Martin isn't a bad man in the way some men are bad. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't drink. He works hard, and he loves Elaine in the way some men love things, possessively, quietly, with the certainty that whatever he does is right. His mother, Judith, is a different matter entirely. Judith Voss is 71 years old and has spent every one of those years believing that her family is a category above everyone else in the room. She grew up in a well-off suburb outside of Charlotte, married a man who built a regional insurance company, and when he passed 12 years ago, she inherited enough to live comfortably and maintain the particular kind of dignity that comes from never having to ask anyone for anything. I'm not resentful of that. I'm really not. What I am is a man who grew up in a 2-bedroom house in East Tennessee with 4 brothers, a father who drove a concrete truck, and a mother who worked the morning shift at a textile plant. I built what I have from nothing, not complaining. Just telling you the facts so you understand what it meant when Judith Voss sat across from my daughter in her living room and said what she said. She said that Martin's family had a certain standing in this community. She said that Elaine was a sweet girl. She said that sometimes sweet isn't enough. She told my daughter that Martin was going to be offered a position at a firm in Richmond, a significant opportunity, and that the partners and their wives moved in circles that required, and this is the word she used, Elaine told me it twice to make sure I'd heard right, polish. She told my daughter that she had spoken to Martin and that they agreed it would be best if Elaine took some time. Some time. They weren't divorcing her. They were parking her. Like a car they didn't know what to do with but weren't ready to total. And Martin, my daughter's husband, Sophie's father, had sat in that same living room and said nothing. I stood in that Cracker Barrel parking lot and listened to all of it. I didn't say much. I asked a few questions. I made sure I understood exactly what had been said and by whom and in what order. Then I walked around to the back of the car and tapped on the window. Sophie woke up, blinked at me, and broke into the kind of smile that children produce before they've learned to be cautious about anything. I said, "Hey, Bug, you hungry?" She said she wanted pancakes. I said pancakes sounded exactly right. We went inside, the 3 of us, and I let Sophie order the full stack with the blueberry syrup and the sausage on the side. Elaine didn't eat much. I had coffee and kept my hands wrapped around the mug. I didn't tell Elaine what I was going to do, partly because I hadn't decided exactly yet. Partly because I've learned that telling people what you're going to do before you do it is a habit that benefits other people more than it benefits you. I paid the check, followed them to Elaine's sister's house where they'd be staying, and made sure they had everything they needed. I kissed Sophie on the top of her head. I told Elaine I loved her and that everything was going to be fine. She asked me not to do anything that would make things worse. I told her I wouldn't. That part was true. Here is what most people don't know about me. And I'll tell you the same reason I told you about the concrete truck and the textile plant. Context matters. I am 63 years old. I have been, in the course of my life, a laborer, a crew foreman, a contractor, a developer, and for the last 19 years, the majority shareholder of a commercial real estate development company called Meridian Property Group. We don't advertise much. We don't sponsor stadiums or put our name on buildings. Well, sometimes the buildings, but not in a way that points back to me. I've always thought that the people who need to know who you are will figure it out eventually, and the people who don't need to know should be left to their assumptions. Meridian owns, manages, or has a financial interest in approximately 47 commercial properties across 4 states. Office buildings, mixed-use developments, a few retail strips, 2 medical complexes. Our operating revenue last year was just north of $80 million. I say this not to impress you. I say it because Judith Voss had sat across from my daughter, who spent 7 years working in non-profit housing before Sophie was born, who has more grace in her left hand than Judith has in her entire family tree, and told her she lacked polish. And Judith did this without knowing one single thing about who I was. That was her first mistake. It was also, as it turned out, a fairly costly one. I have a man who works with me named Stuart. He's been my operations director for 11 years, which means he knows where everything is and how everything connects and which strings to pull when you need something found quickly and quietly. I called Stuart on the drive home from Elaine's sister's place. I said, I need you to pull everything we have on a company called Voss Insurance Group out of Charlotte, and anything connected to a Martin Voss employment, business interests, property. Stuart said he'd have it by morning. He had it by that evening. I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of iced tea and read through everything slowly. Voss Insurance Group, the company Judith's late husband built, had been sold 6 years ago to a regional holding firm. Judith had taken a cash payout and retained a small interest. The family's actual operating income now came primarily from Martin's salary and a property in the Dilworth neighborhood of Charlotte that Judith rented out. That property. I set down my glass, then I pulled up Meridian's portfolio, and I already half knew what I was going to find, but I wanted to see it written down in black and white. The Dilworth property was managed by a third-party firm called Cornerstone Property Services. Cornerstone Property Services had been a wholly owned subsidiary of Meridian Property Group for 4 years. Judith Voss's rental income, the check she received every month, the money that funded her lifestyle and her opinions about other people's polish, ran through my company. She had been, without knowing it, writing a check to my organization every single month for 4 years. I sat with that for a while. Then I went to bed, because there was nothing that needed to be done that night. And I've learned that decisions made at midnight are rarely improved by the hour. I called Martin the next morning. Not Judith. Martin. I want to be clear about this because it matters. I didn't want a confrontation. I didn't want a scene. What I wanted was for my son-in-law to understand that what had happened in his mother's living room was not acceptable, and that he had a decision to make about what kind of man he was going to be. He picked up on the 3rd ring. His voice was careful. He'd been expecting this call and had probably rehearsed something. He said, Frank, I want to explain. I said, I'm not calling to argue, Martin. I'm calling to ask you one question, and I'd like you to think about it before you answer. He went quiet. I said, when your mother told my daughter she wasn't good enough for your family, you were sitting in that room. I need you to tell me, did you agree with her? Silence. I let it sit there. Martin said, it's complicated. I said, it really isn't. More silence. And then he said something I hadn't expected. He said, my mother has always had strong opinions about how things should look. I should have stopped her. I didn't. And I've been sitting with that since it happened. I appreciated the honesty. I said, you have a daughter, Martin. Sophie's going to grow up watching how you handle this. She's going to learn what respect looks like and what it doesn't look from watching you. I'd like you to think about what lesson you want to give her. He said he heard me. I said I hoped he did. Then I said, I hoped he did. Then I said, I need to meet with your mother, alone if possible. I'm not going to ambush her or embarrass her, but there's a business matter that's come to my attention that she needs to be made aware of, and I'd like to handle it face to face." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he'd arrange it. We met at Judith's house in Charlotte 4 days later. She opened the door in a way that told me she'd prepared for this. Hair done, good cardigan. That particular expression some women of her generation use when they've decided to be magnanimous towards someone they consider beneath them. She offered me coffee. I took it. We sat in her living room, the same room where she'd delivered her verdict on my daughter, and she waited for me to begin. I didn't rush. I've been in enough negotiations to know that the person who speaks first out of discomfort is already at a disadvantage. I looked around the room, looked at the photographs on the wall, looked at her. She was a woman who had never been made to feel uncertain in her own home. I was about to change that, but not unkindly. I want to be precise about that. I wasn't there to humiliate her. I wasn't angry in the way that makes you want someone to feel small. I was there because my daughter deserved for someone to stand in a room and tell the truth without flinching, and I was the right person to do it. I said, "Judith, I want to start by telling you something about myself." She raised her eyebrows slightly. Polite. I said, "My father drove a concrete truck for 31 years. My mother worked in a mill until it closed. I put myself through 2 years of community college and then spent the next decade working construction in any weather you can name. At 34, I started a company with $11,000 and a truck I wasn't sure would make it through winter." She was listening with the careful attention of someone waiting for the point. I said, "That company is called Meridian Property Group. We're a commercial real estate development firm. Operating revenue last year was just over $80 million. We own and manage properties across Tennessee, Georgia, the Carolinas, and Virginia." The expression on her face shifted by about 2 degrees. Not much. But I noticed it. I said, "One of the companies under our umbrella is Cornerstone Property Services. They manage a number of residential and mixed-use properties in this region." I paused. "Including the Dilworth property." The 2 degrees became something closer to 20. I watched her understand it, watched the pieces assemble themselves into something she hadn't seen coming and couldn't immediately calculate her way around. I said, "I want to be clear that this meeting isn't a threat. I'm not here to take anything from you or disrupt any arrangements. What Cornerstone does with that property has nothing to do with what happened in this room a week ago, and I won't mix the two." Her coffee cup was in her hand. She set it down carefully. I said, "I'm here because you sat across from my daughter, a woman who has spent her adult life trying to make things better for other people, who raised a child with more kindness than most people manage in a lifetime. And you told her she wasn't good enough. You used the word polish, and I needed you to know who you were talking about when you said that." The room was very quiet. Judith Foss was looking at me the way people look when the floor turns out to be somewhere other than where they thought. She said, "I wasn't trying to be cruel." I said, "I know, that's almost worse." She didn't have an answer for that. I said, "I have one ask, not for me, for Martin." I set my coffee cup down on her table. He has a chance to be the kind of father that Sophie brags about when she's 40 years old. Whether he takes that chance is up to him, and whether you help him take it is up to you. But I'd ask you to think about what kind of grandmother you want to be, and whether the way you see things is worth what it might cost your family. I stood up. I thanked her for the coffee. I shook her hand at the door, a real handshake, not a dismissal, and I walked back to my car. I won't tell you that everything fixed itself immediately after that, because it didn't, and I don't believe in stories that skip over the hard part. Martin drove to his sister-in-law's house that same week. He sat with Elaine for 3 hours. I don't know everything that was said because it wasn't my conversation to know. What Elaine told me was that he cried, which surprised her, and that he said he'd been choosing the easier thing for too long and he knew it. They're working on it. That's the honest answer. They're still married. They're in counseling, which Martin suggested, which I considered the first real evidence that he understood what was at stake. Sophie's doing fine the way children do when the adults around them are at least trying. She doesn't have the full picture, but she has both parents in her corner, and for now that's what matters. Judith called me 6 weeks after our meeting. I almost didn't recognize her voice when I picked up because I hadn't expected to hear from her. She was measured, careful, like someone who had practiced what they wanted to say. She said that she had been thinking about our conversation. She said that she hadn't fully understood, and that she wanted me to know she was sorry for what she had said to Elaine. She said she told Elaine the same thing directly the week before. Elaine had confirmed this. She'd called me after, not sure what to make of it, and I told her that people who've been a certain way for a long time don't change overnight, but sometimes they surprise you. I told her to take it as the first step and not the whole journey. I think that was the right thing to say. Here is what I've been turning over since all of this happened. I've been in business for almost 30 years. I've sat across tables from people who thought they had the leverage and discovered they didn't. I've been underestimated in boardrooms and on job sites and at dinner tables, and every single time, I've thought the same thing. The measurement someone takes of you says more about their instruments than it does about your height. Judith Voss looked at my daughter and saw a woman without pedigree. She didn't see a woman who had organized emergency housing for flood-displaced families in 3 counties. She didn't see a woman who had learned to tile a bathroom herself, because we couldn't always afford to hire it done, and she didn't want to wait. She didn't see a mother who sat with Sophie through a month of ear infections with the patience of someone who had decided firmly that this child would never feel alone. She saw the surface and decided she knew the depth. That's the thing about quiet power. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. It just exists underneath everything doing its work until the moment comes when it matters. I didn't build Meridian to impress Judith Voss. I didn't build it to prove anything to anyone. I built it because I had a father who worked himself down to nothing and deserved better. And I swore early on that the people who came after me would have options that he never had. That's the bloodline I'm proud of. Not a name on a country club list. Not a zip code. Not the right schools, or the right last name, or the right accent. The willingness to work when it's hard, to stay when it's easier to leave, and to show up in a parking lot off I-40 when your daughter calls and just says your name and you already know. That's it. That's the whole thing. Sophie called me last Sunday. She's 5, so the call was mostly about a frog she'd found in the backyard and what she'd decided to name it. She talked for 11 minutes. I know because I was watching the clock, not because I wanted to hang up. Because I wanted to remember it. 11 minutes of total certainty that her grandfather was interested in every word. That's the inheritance I'm leaving. Not the buildings, not the revenue, not the portfolio. The 11 minutes. The parking lot. The pancakes at Cracker Barrel, when everything is falling apart and you need someone to just show up and say, "What do you want, bug? The blueberry syrup or the strawberry?" I think that's enough. I think that's exactly enough. I'd been thinking about cause and effect a lot lately. Not in any abstract way, just a plain, unglamorous version of it that shows up in real life. The version where the things you do quietly, over decades, without applause or acknowledgement, eventually determine what happens in a room you didn't even know you'd be sitting in. Judith Voss made a decision in her living room that day. She looked at my daughter and calculated something, background, presentation, pedigree, and came up with a number she found insufficient. What she didn't calculate was the 32 years on the other side of that equation. The early mornings, the reinvested revenue, the decisions I made in my 40s to build something real instead of something visible. You can't see that kind of work from the outside. That's the whole point of it. And Martin made a decision too, in that same room. He chose silence when silence was the wrong answer. I don't say that to condemn him. I say it because I've made the same kind of choice at different points in my life, and I know what it costs you. There's a particular weight that comes from knowing you saw the right thing to do and didn't do it. Martin was carrying that weight when I called him. I could hear it in his voice before he said a single word. What I've come to believe is this: character isn't what you display when everything is comfortable. It's what you do in the moments that cost you something. Elaine has been showing me her character since she was small. The way she sat with Sophie through a month of ear infections without once letting that child feel like a burden. The way she learned to tile a bathroom floor because she didn't want to wait on anyone else to solve her problem. The way she drove 2 hours before pulling over because she needed to be somewhere safe before she came apart. That's not softness. That's a kind of quiet toughness that most people never develop because they never have to. I built Meridian the same way, not with drama, not with shortcuts, not with anyone's help that I didn't earn first. I built it the way my father drove that concrete truck, showing up, doing the work, keeping my word. I never talked about it much because I didn't think the talking was the point. The point was the work. The point was what it would mean for the people who came after me. Sophie is 5 years old. She doesn't know anything about Meridian. She doesn't know what happened in her grandmother's living room or what her grandfather did about it. All she knows is that I answer when she calls, and I'm interested in the frog she found in the backyard. And when things fall apart, there's a man who will drive to wherever she is and ask her what she wants for breakfast. That's the education I'm trying to give her, not the kind that comes with tuition and a diploma. The kind that comes from watching the adults in your life handle hard things with their dignity intact. From seeing that power doesn't have to announce itself. From learning early that the people who feel the need to rank other people are usually the ones least certain of their own standing. What happened with Judith wasn't revenge. I want to be honest about that. It was correction. There's a difference. Revenge wants the other person to suffer. Correction just wants the record to be straight. I sat in her living room and told her the truth about who she'd dismissed, and I watched her understand it, and that was enough. I didn't need anything else from her. The measure of a person isn't what they build or what they own. It's what they do when someone they love calls and says their name in that hollow, broken way. It's whether they show up. It's whether they know that sometimes the most important thing you can do is order the pancakes and sit across from a 5-year-old who doesn't know the world just tilted and make sure she feels steady anyway. That's the whole inheritance. That's all any of it is for.